G'day legends, I hope you're having a fantastic day, and so far you are having a fantastic weekend. Now for my Australian audience, happy Father's Day. Fathers play an unbelievable important role, not only in the home, but in the community in general. Sadly, dads being dads are often demonised, vilified, and in our court system, massively discriminated against. So stop for a moment, have a pause, and thank you, Dad. I thanked my dad this morning, took him out for a coffee, but to all the dads out there, thank you for what you do. Now, legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go over. We're seeing a lot of damage control from the Western states towards India, especially with Trump's comments and what we saw in China last week. I'm still working on getting my video about China up somewhere where you can see it. I apologise for the delay. I'm not the only one who has been hit with this. Significantly larger channels than I have been as well. Now we know that Russia has hundreds of billions of dollars worth of frozen assets in Europe and in America. But what we are seeing as well is gold prices reach all-time highs. And we're going to look at, well, how much money does Russia actually have tied up in unfrozen gold? And how can this buffer against increased sanctions? We're going to look at that today. Of course, we'll look at the maps. We'll look at strikes on bridges. We'll look at areas that are moving. And I think there's a little bit of fabrication in some of the reporting about why Russia may want a decisive breakthrough. And we're going to talk about that because, as you know, when we talk attritional war is not won by a decisive victory. And then we're going to look at a Chinese system that I've seen pop up today and link this back to an FSB warning, well, alleged FSB warning, a few months ago. So what we saw transpire over the past week was the relationship that has been fostered over decades between India and America be thrown in the wind by Mr. Trump. And Mr. Trump and Vance today are the least liked people on the internet from, I think, everyone actually at the moment. And of course, we reported at length about Trump's comments towards India yesterday. Now, Trump has made some in-person comments in interviews and press conferences today at the White House. Now, he has said, I've always been friends with Modi. He's a great prime minister. India and the US have a special relationship. He says there's nothing to worry about. And Trump said in his Truth Social post that we have lost India to China. And he sort of walked back and they're saying, I don't think we have. I get along very well with Modi, as you know. He was here a couple of months ago. We went to the Rose Garden and Modi shared this on his page and said, deeply appreciate and fully reciprocate Trump's sentiments and positive assessment of our ties. India and the US have a very positive and forward-looking, comprehensive and global strategic partnership. I think there's a lot of damage control going on. Now, Mr. Macron, he spoke with Narendra Modi and he put this on his Twitter. I presented him an outcome of the work we carried out with President Zelensky and our partners of the Coalition of the Willing last Thursday in Paris. Remember, many nations are saying the key to bringing Russia to the table is India and purchase of that oil. But what India is doing is India is saying we need that for our own energy security. And what I see of this is damage control, especially these European leaders are going, hey, if we cut ties with India, like I said yesterday, what is the plan? If you're saying that India, they hold the keys to bring Russia to the table. Now, I don't agree with that assessment. But if you are saying that and you're cutting the tie here, well, what is your plan from here going forwards? Now, let's have a look at gold. Now, gold, we are seeing over the past week, we are seeing record highs of basically $3,600 per ounce. So between 2014 and 2020, gold ranged from $1,100 to $1,500. Now, what we know is Russia massively increased its gold reserves by about 40 million ounces. Since then, Russia has made a profit of approximately $92 billion, and their gold reserves sit around that $270 billion mark. Some of these numbers could be off by a fair bit, but these are just approximations for what we are going through. Russia's military budget last year was $149 billion, with around $390 billion of central bank international reserves unfrozen, that remain unfrozen, where there's about 300 billion that we do see that are frozen. And this is leading many to doubt about increased sanctions and how powerful that will or won't be to bring Russia to the table, looking at how much sits in these reserves. So let's talk about the maps. So here, of course, we have Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, what we see is basically through Ukraine, north to south, is split by the Dnieper River. Ukraine is under large missile and drone attack as we speak. And we'll have a look at this footage right here. Now, you can hear in this footage from a Geran drone, and we'll see a strike against a bridge. But we'll talk about this when we actually see the strike come through. So the bridge here, and then you can see that explosion. And this bridge sits in Kremenchuk. Now, I've put just in the red where the Dnieper River runs. Now, bridges are very difficult to bring down. It can be expensive, but it is definitely possible to bring down bridges. And like many, I still fail to see why Russia has not put more effort into targeting bridges across the Dnieper that would have a huge impact on Ukrainian logistics. Now, what we know is Geran drones sit between a drone and a cruise missile. We went over that yesterday. There's sort of differences in where that overlap is, but these are very, very cheap. And with the increase in the number of Gerans and the lethality of these, potentially we will see an increase in targeting on bridges, because we know that would have a huge effect. And when I was in Dnipro years ago, looking at the bridges there, I was going, I cannot believe that these are still standing, just with the amount of logistics that move to the front line across these areas. So maybe we'll see an increase in that, maybe not. But let's have a look at the maps, and any of the red check that you'll see today, this is ground that Russia has made over the past 24 hours that we can confirm due to this being the Ukrainian deep state map. So let's come into this area here, and we'll just stay zoomed out for a little bit, because we see where Sloviansk sits, we'll see where Siversk is, we'll see where Izium is, and this is a very important area. Now, not only is Siversk getting enveloped, but there's an envelopment of this whole Borova area out from this Terney sector. And what I've been saying now for months, keep an eye on this Terney, Kharkivkia, Ridkadub front line pushing out here. This puts a lot of pressure on multiple areas, both in its west, in its north, and its south. Although this is being greatly ignored, more people are paying attention to this area today. And the first ones to raise this has been deep state. The enemy is striking with FPV drones on the Sloviansk-Izium highway. So if we just zoom in, Izium, Sloviansk, and you'll get yellow, this highway that is going down here, with a number of vehicles getting hit and a number of military assets being hit as well. Now, it's not news the enemy can strike from 25 plus kilometres from the front line, and it's not news we see FPVs working at that sort of distance. But these facts are a warning bell about the danger in this area. The enemy took advantage of the geographical features where the road passes and saw the opportunity to strike targets from heights where it is easier to fly. And potentially we are seeing these FPVs come off the wings of Orlan drones, potentially, but that is how you would get around electronic warfare envelopes at the very front line. And AMK mapping, he has spoken about this as well. Ukrainians also reporting Sloviansk-Izium highways under Russian fire control from FPV drones around that 19 kilometres. And you get a good idea on his map of this Terney area that I have been speaking about. And this is where I've said it is in all Russia's incentive to move this north and south, and no real incentive to move much further west than Kharkivkia. And we have seen them moving this, confirmed by the Ukrainian map, particularly on the southern edge. Let's have a look then at the Syriac maps today, and here's showing further of this today, out from area of Kolodiazi. But here's showing there's far more movement in the direction of Drobosheve as well, right down into these sectors, and further movement in the direction of Liman Stavke. See where this road like loops around on the north of Stavke? He's saying that it's basically up to this area on his update yesterday. Again, this doesn't meet our threshold for confirmation. Russian army continue advancing towards Derelove and is very close to the northern outskirts of the locality. Now, Derelove sits just down in this sector here. You can just see the label pop up there, but you can see the pressure this puts on, like roads from Izium through to Sloviansk, very important area to supply down into Siversk, but also the envelopment to the north of this sector as well. Again, as we've been saying, keep an eye on this. You can see the red check, more ground being made through the Kremenar Forest, one of the areas that has the heaviest amount of fortifications on anywhere in this war. So that is an important area shifting as well. Now let's move our way down into Bakhmut. And AMK mapping made me aware today of something I spoke about the other day. So let's look to the north of Bakhmut, Minkivka. Now, what did I say the other day? The other day I said on a video, we've seen TOS, thermobarics, landing in Minkivka. Typically, this is one of the weapon systems we see used last before ground forces start moving in. And he messaged me there. So I saw he was saying something about TOS. This could be related. And Playfra says this: in this direction, active artillery guns fired from the hill in these highlighted areas. They're using diagonal firing, and that is targeting objectives not the first line. 30th Mech firmly entrenched in this area, thwarts Russian attempts to advance in Horovka. Focus is now on Vusikivka. Attacks are made to be expected in the so-called Old Road. But this is in this direction here. So just keep an eye out on this area just that sits to the north of Bakhmut. Now, we'll move our way down into Pokrovsk, and let's talk about this area a little bit more at length. Now, we do have one map to show you on the eastern side here, and what Surek is showing is this Ukrainian push coming out of Belyatsky really into this Nikhanovka area to try and undercut where the Russians are in here. Again, this map still showing more Russian control than the deep state map is, and in this eastern push on Pokrovsk that we have seen, or northeastern push, it's still very hard to get an idea exactly how this is looking even a few weeks on. But again, more will become clear in the future. But let's talk about Pokrovsk, and we see this being shared from the 7th Army Corps of Air Assault Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, a statement on the operational situation. Russian command moved experienced units of the Marine Infantry in the area of Pokrovsk. These DRGs, they're trying to infiltrate in single or small groups. The main goal of the enemy at Pokrovsk, to get as close as possible to the positions of drone operators or mortars to try and disperse the forces of our defence, consolidate new positions and expand the boundaries on the grey zone. And this is what we have seen particularly done from Rubicon, striking those Ukrainian drone operators. At the same time on the flanks, the enemy intensified assault actions using armoured and motorised equipment, trying to cut off logistics routes. And this is where we've seen these logistics route in and out of Pokrovsk has been under massive fire control for some time. In doing so, the enemy has reduced the number of airstrikes at 0 positions. And the 0 position is the very frontline position. And the Russians have reduced the airstrikes there. That's going to become important. According to available information, Russia plans to use its grouping in the Donetsk region for a so-called decisive breakthrough with the use of a large number of personnel and equipment. The goal of the opponent is to capture the agglomeration of Pokrovsk. Now, I disagree with this assessment due to my knowledge and my understanding of attritional war and how I've been seeing the Russians fight this and giving many a lesson in attritional war. And what I've seen Ukraine use again and again and again is what Trump uses politically. And I'll refer to this as fabricated authority. Now, what Trump will use, or a good example of this, is he will go, I had a closed meeting with Putin and Putin told me that the last election was rigged. Now, it's a closed meeting. We can't disprove or prove, but what it is doing is adding authority to what he says. Therefore, even if it is bullshit, it's picked up and has more steam behind it. Now, often what we see is Ukraine say Russia plans to do whatever by this time, which may never have been said, may never have been planned, but when then it doesn't happen, it's then reported as a failure, much like there's a 60 or 70,000 troops up in Kursk ready to launch some massive offensive. Now, whether that did or did not exist, in my opinion, didn't exist due to the time frame to actually react to that. But then when there is a failure there, it's a larger celebration and as a success that is sold too. So You get the idea of this fabricated authority, that we have a leak that they need to capture Pokrovsk by this date. You get the idea. So this could be that. But attritional war is well known that it is not won through a decisive victory. It is ground to a victory through your adversary's failure. And I don't see any point in Russia trying to take Pokrovsk decisively while they have Pokrovsk sitting in a fire-controlled kill box with Ukraine pushing massive amounts of forces into this area and the rotations being very costly. And the reduction of strikes at the zero line, I believe, is evidence of this, not wanting to push that forward, to keep that open because it's working in the Russians' favour for attrition. That's how I see this. And we see even today, actually in Minograd, but sits just to the east of Pokrovsk, we see massive fab strikes. You can see it just up here on your screen, and we see many, many weapon systems like this, from your heavy artillery of fabs through to your artilleries, landing in Pokrovsk. So the chaos with the DRGs holding it, but the goal is attrition, even if that means stepping rearwards at times or holding. And at this point in time, Pokrovsk, Minograd, massive important areas for Ukraine, particularly optically, but also logistically. So they'll keep trying to hold this. The no step back policy Ukraine has from centres like this. Why then would they launch massive costly attacks to have a decisive taking of these areas rather than holding and then furthering their attritional battle in sectors like this? So let's move our way then into Velyka Novosilka, just to the west of here. We do see a Russian advancement into Novosilivska, still behind where we saw those Russian flags go up, with a generous serving of grey zone in this sector. So let's have a look at what Suryak map says. Now, Yanovarske sits here. He shows some movement too. He says the southeast of here, but does show movement in this direction, as well as Russia reclaiming some ground around Dashne, which sits just in here. We know that area is very liquid at the moment. But then he shows on today's map a massive amount of ground being made relative to what we see. So if we take some areas on this, such as Sosnivska, and we'll take Alexandrahad, and also this green forested area in here, you can see where there has been further movement alleged from him right down through the Ternove, Somsivskia area in here. And a lot of that grey, he is saying, is coming under red. But keep an eye on this area. There's still a lot of resources, both Ukrainian and Russian, to try and improve and stabilize the front line that has been falling since Velyka Novosilka. So let's move our way. We'll actually go from the south and we'll go right up into the north. Now, what we do see on today's map is we actually see red check to the south of Yanakivkia on the Sumy front. That area, I don't think the story of Kursk's failed movements is over yet. Then we'll come into Vovchansk, an area we haven't spoken about for some time in the Kharkiv Oblast. Now, in the direction of Teshelne, you see this forested region in here. This is where we're going to be looking. Now, what Suryak says, in the last days, by the time we restart operations at the forest west of Vovchansk, trying to reach the town of Selnakovke. So just further down into this sector in here, you can see Snelnikove come up. Now again, is there any primary goals in Vovchansk or in Sumy? In my opinion, no. But what this does is you allocate resource there. Ukraine has to push then better units to try and stabilise this, and manpower, which we know is critically low, up into these secondary theatres, therefore making the primary theatre more thin than it already is. In the north, we did see movement made and confirmed over the last days in here, and Suryak has then spoken further about this today. So we see up in this sector right here, this is the movement we saw out of Petrivka in that direction, and then just down, we'll look at this movement just here. Now, this is going to be a little bit difficult to find, but it's in the Kupiansk pocket, and it's just this sector here. See where this road then doglegs? It's just underneath in this area in here. But I wouldn't be surprised to start seeing this area of Kupiansk really start having more pressure on it. And to the north of here, we are seeing more pressure being applied as well. We'll move our way down into Siversk. So we have Siversk just here. We see where that is moving. We spoke about that previously, but it does appear that Ukraine has made some ground back to the northwest of Serebrenka. But remember, this whole area that hadn't moved for years has really started moving. So keep an eye on that specific sector. Now, let's have a look at this. And we may be drawing a long bow here, but to be honest, of all YouTubers, I think I draw the shortest bows of many. So let's have a look here. This was reported on the 30th of the 6th that China builds new large jet-powered Akranaplan. We see it on the back of this ship here. Now, the Times recently did an article in the past months that there was an alleged FSB leak, Russia's intelligence service, that the Chinese were contacting engineers and planners from the Soviet times who built or worked on the Caspian Sea Monster, or the ground effect Akranaplan across the Caspian. So we've seen that there's that. Now, was it the Ministry of State Security from China? Again, we don't really know, but there was that leak that I found interesting. Of all of those leaks, some seem legit, some seem overblown, but the wanting for technology of these ground effect vehicles. And then today we see a new photo come out. Now, this is very, very small considering the massive size of the Akranaplan. But I believe this, to me, looks like a prototype. There's no way a vehicle this small needs this many engines on it. So maybe testing, potentially, we could see a ground effect vehicle come into play in the Chinese services. And of course, it makes sense. It sits above the water, it sits below radio, can be massively armed, and is incredibly fast. There's a lot of pros to a vehicle like that, especially when we look to the east of China and potentially what their goals may be. Legends, I hope that you have a wonderful day and a great rest of your weekend, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.